I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. In this episode, I was honored to interview Herman Pontzer, the author of Burn. New research blows the lid off how we really burn calories, lose weight, and stay healthy. He is an associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University and associate research professor of global health at the Duke Global Health Institute. Dr. Pontzer is internationally recognized as one of the foremost researchers in human metabolism, and in his book Burn, he reveals surprising new science behind food and exercise. He shares these surprising findings and how it can improve our own health and ability to lose weight. He explains why exercise is not the way to lose weight. He shares unbelievable information about how extra calories, no matter what the source, will end up as fat. He dispels myths related to popular diets such as keto, explains how energy expenditure works, the effects of overtraining, how we have a fixed energy budget, and lots more. Awesome, informative interview. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. My hope is truly to bring you information that can help you live longer, happier, and healthier. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello, Dr. Pontzer. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to sharing your work on Burn, your latest book.
Thanks. Yeah, it's my first book, actually. So,
Yeah.
It's nice to have, it's like your first child out into the world.
Yeah. Well, I've seen you on quite a few podcasts now, so the word's getting out. It's an important topic.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Well, let's just talk about you. Start by just talking about who you are, what you do, and what led you into studying the Hadzas and metabolism and all that good stuff.
Sure. So I'm an anthropologist by training, biological anthropologist. I'm interested in how the human body evolved, how our past kind of shapes our present. And so I've always been interested in energy for that reason, because, as from a kind of evolutionary biology perspective, right? I like to say life is a game of turning energy into babies. So, that's kind of where it all comes down to for any species on the planet. Mm-hmm. And so, trying to understand how humans spend energy seems like a really obvious thing to do. And I spent a lot of time in my graduate work, early 2000s, doing the energetics of walking and running and looking at like the mechanics of walking and running and all that, and how that translates to how many calories you burn per mile when you walk and run. And I wanted to sort of expand that and understand the full energy budgets for humans. But of course, we didn't really have any data for hunter-gatherer communities, and humans are a hunting and gathering species. And so that seemed like an obvious thing to do, is to go measure energy expenditures in hunting and gathering communities. And thankfully, there's a handful of them left. Well, fewer and fewer, but there's the Hadza community in northern Tanzania was one who I had friends who worked there, mm-hmm. and it was kind of an opportunity for us to go and measure energy expenditures there.
Wow. So what was it like just initially? I mean, it had to be a shock going from, we're just, everything's accessible. We go all day and night. So what was it like going over there and just, being around that kind of environment and those kind of people?
Yeah, it's, I love to travel. And I love to camp and that kind of stuff. So like the roughing it aspect of it was didn't seem so strange to me. Mm-hmm. And the travel part of it didn't seem so strange, but even with that, it feels like you're stepping into a different world. It really does.
Yeah.
Because, you're in I grew up, loving the nature documentaries on PBS and National Geographic and that kind of stuff. And, the wildebeest migrating through the savannah. And you step out of your Land Rover. First of all, when you go to work with the Hadza, you fly to Tanzania. And then you're packing up your Land Rovers it's like a big camping trip. So you're packing up with food, mm-hmm. and tents and all that kind of stuff, plus all your scientific stuff.
Yeah.
And then you're driving like just kind of on dirt tracks to get back to some of these Hadza camps. And it really does feel kind of magical. And like you're stepping into a whole different world. They slip it onto the pages of a National Geographic
Yeah.
magazine. It's kind of, it's amazing that way. And the folks are so nice and generous and hospitable. They love to see you and have you there. And it just feels magical.
I bet they were were they a simple people? Like here, I think we've complicated everything. I mean, we'll talk about diet and exercise, but just life in general, it seems like it would just be more of a simple, maybe less stress or maybe more stress because they have to live like that.
It's interesting. I think the stresses are really different. I think that's an important kind of difference. There's no alarm clocks or calendars, there's no deadlines. Yeah. So in that sense, it's very much less stressful that way, like the stresses that we kind of invent for ourselves. There's also, it's very egalitarian. There's no chief, there's no boss, there's nobody who can tell you anything what to do. Men and women are on equal footing, so they can't tell each other what to do. They can try. I mean, it's like, it's like here. But, so it's interesting because when you go there, like I said, it feels so magical when you get there. And then what you realize after you've been there a while is just how sort of deeply similar, right? We're all people. We're all humans, right? So the usual, the kind of ebb and flow and like worrying about your kids and thinking about what you're going to do, today and all that, that's sort of, there's a commonality, right? I think that is really deep and shared and makes it really fun to be there for a while and kind of understand them in the same way that you understand everybody else, in your world here. But yeah, a lot of the stresses that we deal with, they don't have. Now, they do have the stress that if their kid gets sick, right, there's a real good chance that could get serious. Yeah. And that's it's really sad and it's hard. If you sprain an ankle out foraging, right, that could actually be a problem for you. I mean, here's some inconvenience, and you take some Advil. That could be a real problem, right? So there's some real serious stresses that we don't deal with because we've insulated ourselves, and we've kind of filled that stress space with all these kind of daily things that are artificial and kind of new. And so I don't know, I'm not sure who's less stressed, but I think we trade different kinds of stress.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see what you're saying. In their world, like, what was it like? What do they do? Like, and then I guess going into it, what were some of the things that you hope to learn from them? What were some of your hypotheses that you had going into working with them? And maybe what surprised you the most about working with them or your outcomes?
Yeah, well, you learn a lot. It's hard to boil it down in terms of like sort of, life lessons or whatever. I think sort of learning being able to separate, to see such a, I'll back up. Anytime you travel to different cultures, right? Is it Mark Twain who said the whole point of travel is to come back home and see it all in a new way again, right? To see your own life in a new way because you've had this sort of out of culture experience, whether you're going to Niagara Falls for a weekend or you're going to, Paris or just a different state or anything like that. Yeah. Certainly if you're going to some places as sort of obviously different as a Hadza camp, but you travel anywhere will give you that perspective. And so the main scientific thing that we were trying to do is understand how many calories you burn every day when you're in a lifestyle like that, because it's really physically active, right? Men and women get like between 13,000 and 19,000 steps a day on average, sometimes much more, but sometimes a bit less. And, it's it's just a lot of hard work. And so that's kind of typical of other, we can call them traditional societies, I guess, small scale societies, farmers, foragers, hunter gatherers. It's a really physically active lifestyle. And we thought, well, they would burn lots and lots of calories, more than we do here in the US. And instead, the big shocker was we didn't see that at all. That if you measure energy expenditures, total calories burned per day, we use this technique called doubly labeled water, which is like the gold standard for this kind of measurement. The total calories burned per day was no different for Hadza men and women compared to men and women in the US and other industrialized countries. So big shocker there, huge shocker.
Yeah, you would just think that they would be burning so many calories that just doing all of that work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they get 5 to 10 times more physical activity every day than a typical American does. And
that.
to see no difference in the energy expenditure, that was a shocker. You have to, that's accounting for body size and all that stuff. So we ran all the statistical comparisons in 10 different ways, but there's none of those comparisons will, tell you that they're burning more calories. So it's indistinguishable from what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. I bet what you didn't see, though, is the obesity over there that we see here, even though we're not burning, much different than the calories.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So that's one of the really exciting things. I went over there as an anthropologist interested in just how the human body works and that kind of lifestyle, because it's so important, it's so salient for our understanding our past and how our bodies evolved. But there are all of these public health implications, because you're absolutely right. They don't get heart disease. They don't get type 2 diabetes. They're not overweight or obese. Weight is really stable through the adult lifespan. As people age, they stay very healthy and very kind of vital. You don't see any evidence of frailty in older ages. So, they are like models for public health. And it's how we might hope to live and age. And so one of the hypotheses that was out there before we started this work was, well, it's because they're burning more calories every day, right? So that was a kind of a piece of that was, well, if they're burning more calories every day, then they're not, accumulating those extra food calories as fat. And that's why they avoid overweight and obesity. And then so to see that they aren't burning more calories every day, that was like, aha, that's a real light bulb moment, because you go, oh, well, so they are healthy. They are active. Activity is still obviously very, very good for them. But it's not doing what the mechanism, the link isn't what we thought it was. And it's not about burning more calories. It seems to be about sort of how you spend your calories.
Right. What with the thing is about the longevity and all that. So it's not all just about the calories. What you're saying, all that still contributes to the longevity and their health is the staying active all day. I think that's a big takeaway ultimately, is that they're staying active all day.
Yeah, one of the things that happened when we published this work, it's almost 10 years ago now, and we said, oh my gosh, guys, they're spending the same number of calories that we are, and even though they're more physically active, they're not burning more calories. And we said, well, maybe this means that lifestyle doesn't change the number of calories you burn every day as much as we thought it did. And maybe instead, activity is doing something else for us. And that got picked up by the press. The obvious clickbait title for that, if you're going to cover that, is you don't have to exercise. Right. Look, researchers discover that you don't have to exercise, which of course it was never what we said, and never what that was never our message. It's just basically it's saying that exercise is doing a different thing than you think it is. I think the other piece of it too is that if you think about exercise and diet as basically all about how you're kind of pushing energy in and energy out, then and either of them is kind of flexible, then you approach obesity and overweight differently, right? If one solution to obesity is, I just ramp up how many calories I burn every day, or the other option is I take down how many calories I eat every day, then you can decide day to day, week to week, whatever for your life. You might decide, I'm going to focus on exercise, or I'll focus on diet. And what our results add to is this growing understanding that actually it doesn't work that way. That, for overweight and obesity, you got to focus on diet, because that's energy in is what's really flexible. You can easily overeat, right? It's so easy to do. You actually can't change the energy expenditure very much. That's kind of stuck. And so for weight management, it's all about diet, seems like, to simplify things. But for everything else, right, exercise is doing this other stuff. It's not about energy expenditure so much in exercise. It's about, all of the ways that exercise affects all the other aspects of our health. And so it sort of changes how you spend your calories, and thinking about exercise and diet as two tools for two different jobs.
Yeah, it's funny because, we've complicated things. We've got all these different diets, all these different things.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, it's like, okay, worrying about the calories you intake and moving more that's way too simple. That doesn't work. But ultimately, it seems like that's kind of what you're finding. I mean, calories, you've heard it doesn't matter if you count calories. Don't worry about counting calories. But honestly, it's a big component of what you should be worried about.
Yeah, I mean, for your weight, it really does all come down to calories, and people love to hate on calories in, calories out, right?
Yeah,
And it makes sense because it is so hard to keep track of calories, right? The fact that your body can adjust to an exercise program in ways that you have you're not aware of that, right?
Yeah.
For that matter, your body can adjust if you go on a crash diet and really severely restrict how many calories you eat, which nobody recommends.
Right.
Your body can adjust to that too, slow down your metabolism. And so your body's doing all this complex stuff behind the scenes that you have no way to know. You have no awareness of.
Yeah.
And so it can seem totally futile to count calories. That doesn't mean that that's not what's happening, right? Just because you are bad at balancing your checkbook doesn't mean that spending money and your income don't determine how much money's in the bank, right? I mean, like you can be bad at finances and it really is still all about money.
Right.
You can be bad at counting calories. It still really is all about calories.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about, so you studied the Hadzas for a while, but you also have studied other species. And I want to talk about the apes because, they're close to us.
Sure.
What did you learn studying them? And how
that was so fascinating and fun. So we worked with, nobody had measured energy expenditures in any of the apes either when we started this. And it was like, as a scientist, that's just such a lucky sort of thing to realize that what you're excited about, nobody's done. And of course, maybe that means that nobody wanted to do it.
That's a lot of work.
So, but in our case, we got really lucky because nobody had done this measurement before. And so we partnered with zoos and sanctuaries around the world. Really, we had African sanctuaries for chimpanzees, and now we've had one for orangutans in Indonesia, and zoos across the U.S. I think we had 14 zoos in the U.S. by the time it was done, and we measured energy expenditures using the same techniques as we use for people. So these are completely safe isotope tracking methods. It's this kind of, it's the gold standard. So if you were to go to a really high-end nutrition research center here in the US to be part of a study, it's called doubly labeled water. This is what they'd use for you. And so we use that for the Hadza and we use it for the apes. And so we've got chimpanzees and bonobos and gorillas and orangutans, and we've measured them all. And it's so interesting because, when I was trained as a sort of young anthropologist learning about humans and apes and our relationships to them and how our bodies are similar. I was trained that basically our metabolisms are all the same. Our bodies all run the same. We're kind of different shapes and sizes, but more or less the same kind of engine, right? And it turns out that's not true at all. So humans are the fastest metabolisms of any of the apes. Chimpanzees and bonobos, which are in the same genus, the genus Pan, they're next. They're about 20% less than us. So a chimpanzee and a human, if you could imagine that if you pair them right in this thought experiment, you have the same lifestyle, same body size, all that stuff. The human's energy is we're just burning 20% more energy every day than the chimpanzee is.
Wow.
Gorillas are a bit less, and then orangutans are like almost sloth-like. They have really slow metabolisms.
Wow.
And what's cool is it kind of all fits into their ecology, right? So orangutans, they live in Southeast Asia in the rainforests there, and you would think that if you live on fruits and leaves, that if you live in a rainforest, you can kind of always have food to eat. But that's actually not true. So it's been really well documented the last few decades that sometimes there's tons of fruit to eat in a Southeast Asian rainforest, and sometimes there's nothing for weeks and weeks. And the orangutans are reduced to ripping the bark off of trees and scraping the inside, spongy stuff off just to get something to eat. So we think that having evolved in those forests, in those kind of boom bust ecologies, they've evolved this really slow metabolism to kind of be able to get through the food poor times so they don't starve to death. And then humans on the other end of the spectrum, the high energy apes that we are, well, we've evolved this high energy ape strategy because it fuels our big brains, right? Your brain runs a 5K every day inside your skull. It's 300 kilocalories a day. We have babies more often, and our babies are bigger than other apes are. We are more physically active, right? So it's super interesting. And the other thing is we get a measure of body composition. So humans are also the fattest ape, right? So humans, we easily have 20% body fat. Some women are often in the mid 20s of percent body fat. Men, even in really healthy populations, active populations like the Hadza, are in the mid teens for body fat percentage. In the US, it can be much higher than that for both men and women. Chimpanzees in a zoo, just hanging out in a zoo, have like 10% body fat or less, which is like Olympic level athlete kind of body composition, nice. Right? They just inherently just don't put on body fat. Anyway, so there's just so many things you learn, and it kind of also decouples things like, we burn the most energy, but we're also the fattest. Wait a second, right? If it's some simple relationship between metabolism and fat, then that shouldn't be the case. But of course, it's not that simple. There's all these interesting things under the surface.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about metabolism, because we just throw it around. So what is metabolism, and why is it so important for us to know? Like, what is it? Why do we need to know about it? And why is it so important when it comes to what we eat and how much we eat?
Sure.
You did a great job talking about, I was so just breaking down the carbs and the fats and the proteins. I was just like so impressed with that. So if you could just talk about it.
Thank you. Yeah. Metabolism is everything, right? It's everything that your body does. And so you think about it, you've got 37 trillion cells, give or take, right? Nobody's counting your exact number, but it's about 37 trillion cells.
It's a lot of cells.
It's a lot of cells. And each one of them is this little microscopic factory, right? That's bringing in nutrients from the bloodstream. It chops them up, makes new products, enzymes, whatever, does all the work that it has to do internally, sends out waste or sends out signaling molecules, right? So it's just every cell in your body is busy. And, the thing you learn hopefully in your high school science class is that you can't do work without energy, right? Work and energy are just two ways of thinking about the same thing, right? If you do work, it takes energy. There's no free ride. And so every cell is doing all this work to take these molecules in and chop them up and whatever. And all of that takes energy. And so you've got 37 trillion little factories all doing work all day. And we could either measure all the products they make, we could measure the work that way, or and some people do that actually. It's called metabolomics, and they measure the gene products and all this kind of stuff. And it's really cool science. Or you could do the easier thing, which is what I do and a lot of people do, which is you measure how much energy that you're burning. And since it's the two sides of the same process, it's the same kind of measurement. So all the work your cells do all day, we can measure how many calories you burn to do that. That's a measure of energy. And if your cells are burning their energy faster, doing more work faster, you're going to have a higher metabolic rate. If they work slowly, you're going to have a lower metabolic rate. If there's more of them, if you're a big person and you have lots more cells, you're going to have a high metabolic rate. If you're smaller, it's going to be less. And so that's kind of how that's the basics. Now, of all that work that your cells are doing, think about, your brain and your immune system and your digestion and your kidneys and all of that stuff. You're not aware of hardly any of it, right? What you're aware of is exercise, maybe, or like the walk to the store, or whatever it is. You're aware of moving. And so we tend to think, and movement does take energy. And so we tend to think of exercise and energy expenditure as kind of the same thing, and that your metabolism is all about how active you are and how much you move. But you're missing, well over half your calories that way, because most of what your energy is spent on are things you're not even aware of. And of course, then diet brings you in nutrients and vitamins and all these things, but it brings you in energy fundamentally to fuel all that work.
So with our bodies doing a lot of that stuff we're not even controlling, right? We don't really have any control over that. So how is that determined? Like our metabolic, how fast it's doing the work. Like some people are like, whatever, they don't have to worry about it. Whereas others, it just seems like just generally slow.
Yeah. We don't have a great handle on why some people are faster than others, why some people are slower than others. It is absolutely so partly we know that, here's what we do know. Let's start there.
Okay.
What we do know is that if you're bigger and if you have more lean mass, because lean tissues, muscle, but especially your organs, those cells are doing a lot of work all day, so they burn energy faster. So if you're bigger and you have more of that lean mass, you're going to burn more energy every day, right? You've got more of those little factories kicking along, doing more work.
Mm-hmm.
So body size and composition are the biggest determinants of how many calories you as a human burn every day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is it that humans all burn around 2,500, 3,000 calories a day versus another species that might burn a lot more or a lot less?
Mm-hmm.
We actually don't know that answer.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know sort of species to species what's controlling that, like what this, we know how the system works in general. Your
Mm-hmm.
thyroid gland, for example, produces thyroid hormone, and that tends to ramp up metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
So on some, we know the basics, but we don't really know how the system's fine-tuned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And within individuals, we don't know why these two people who have the exact same body size, same fat percentage, same lifestyle, why this person burns 300 calories a day more than we'd expect, and this person burns 300 calories a day less than we'd expect. And that kind of variation we see all the time when we actually go and measure this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is that fast metabolism person and the slow metabolism person, that doesn't doom them to like being lean or overweight. It doesn't work that simply, right? When people say, oh, I don't have to struggle with my weight, I must have a fast metabolism, what they're really saying is my reaction to food seems to be well regulated, and my brain doesn't push me to overconsume a little bit. Mm-hmm. Somebody who says, gosh, I struggle all the time, I must have a slow metabolism. That doesn't necessarily mean that they actually burn fewer calories. It doesn't really work that way. What they're really expressing is that, gosh, my reaction to food and how my brain makes me feel hungry or full is always pushing me to overconsume a little bit. And I fight that. That seems to be what people mean when they say higher or faster slow metabolism, because it doesn't really correspond to how many calories you burn every day.
Before we get into diet is the most important thing for weight loss. So is our brain really in control?
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, it is amazing how much say your brain has in this. So they have, I'm not a geneticist, but I read the work because it's so fascinating. People have identified hundreds, I want to say nearly 1,000 genes, who, if for each of those genes, if you have this variant, you're more likely to be lean. If you have this variant, you're more likely to be overweight or obese, right? So there's 900 of these, at least, that the different variants can tell you. Each one increases or decreases slightly your likelihood of being overweight or normal weight. All of those genes, with few exceptions, are active in your brain.
Wow.
Right? This is a brain regulation issue. The new world of drugs that are working so well, semaglutide and other GLP-1 agonists, really important amounts of weight loss, and they seem to be signaling hunger and satiety, how full you feel, right? That seems to be the target of those things. So really, how full you feel, how driven you feel to eat, and then maybe eat too much, it really seems to be driven by your brain regulation of calories. Really does.
Yeah. And also, just being able to recognize that you're full and maybe saying, I really don't have any more room for that dessert. I mean, I need to skip it. But then some of us just go for it anyway.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And we all feel that way, but some of us feel it more strongly. I mean, here's the other thing. If you are, okay, so let's say you burn about 3,000 calories a day. That'd be a typical American energy expenditure. It's not 2,000 calories a day, by the way. It's more like 3,000 calories a day. So let's say that you're the typical American. You burn about 3,000 kilocalories a day, would be the technical term, kilocalories. 3,500 kilocalories a day is about a pound's worth of energy, right? If you burn off 3,500 calories, it's about a pound. Now, let's say you gain 2 pounds a year, right?
That's probably typical, isn't it?
That's quite typical. Yeah. That's the American obesity epidemic, is you go from being a normal weight 20-year-old, you gain 2 pounds a year, and by the time you're 40, you're 40 pounds overweight.
Yeah.
That sounds typical. That is typical. Right? That sounds like you. 2 pounds a year, that's only 2 days worth of energy over the course of a 365-day year. Wait a second. You actually have matched energy intake and expenditure extraordinarily well, haven't you? You've only been off by 2 divided by 365, right? Which is like less than 0.5%. Yeah. Less than 1/10%, I think. You've done an excellent job matching intake and expenditure without really even knowing or trying, because your brain is what's doing it. You're under the surface, behind the scenes is what your brain's doing this.
Yeah.
But if you're that typical American gaining 2 pounds a year, your brain is just doing a little, it's not perfect. It isn't, and it's not only is it not perfect and kind of noisy, but it's kind of always leaning a little bit too much this way. That's what drives it. So it really is like a brain regulation issue more than, you're a bad person, or you don't have willpower, or you're not active enough. It's really, it gets framed in these ways that really blame the person.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. It doesn't help. Right. And it makes people shut down. They don't want it. They feel like they've failed. No, right. Our food environments push us that way. And it's really subtle and insidious, actually. Yeah. And that doesn't mean there aren't things you can do to try to take control of it. But it does mean that you have to kind of let yourself off the hook, I think, and realize this is a societal issue about the diets that we put in front of ourselves.
Yeah. And also you hear a lot about insulin's role. And, eating all the time, you're releasing more insulin and then you're just contributing. I myself, I thought, well, it's a storage hormone and you're going to be releasing insulin all day if you're eating all day. And then you're going to, contribute to weight gain. Is that important, or, are we placing too much emphasis on that? I think
there's too much emphasis on insulin. Insulin actually, it is true that insulin does all the things that people say. That's the sort of biochemistry 101. We've known that for a long time. The idea that insulin is kind of running the show, right, and making you obese, or that your diet makes insulin spike and that makes you obese. I don't think the evidence is there for that. It's a really interesting idea. People call it the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. Gary Taubes has written a lot about this, other people too. And, 15 years ago or so, when people were really excited about this as a model, people took it really seriously because it seems very plausible. The physiology kind of makes sense. And so people said, okay, well, let's see if this is really true, then we need to know, and we can use this. And so they went out to set out to try to show or test if that works. That's how the science goes, right? You have a lot of circumstantial evidence that says, oh, this might really be important. But that's not enough. Right, the stories aren't enough, and the circumstantial evidence isn't enough. You got to go and really attack it. And when they did that, kind of didn't hold up. And so, insulin does do the kind of physiological work that people say it does. Of course, it helps put nutrients into fat cells, for example. But it doesn't seem to be driving obesity. And what that means is that you aren't necessarily, if you want to try to reduce how many calories you're bringing in and reduce obesity, you don't have to only focus on carbohydrate, right? That's one way you could go. You could reduce how much carbohydrate you eat. That might be really good. People do really great on the low carb diets sometimes. But you might also go low fat, or you might go high fiber or high protein, right? You could have different options. And so I think it's actually good in some ways to understand that insulin doesn't drive the show the way that we think it does, because it actually expands our options.
I think I wanted to touch on something I found really interested in what you said. And I think it's important to mention this. You said any calories that are not burned, no matter where they come from, whether it's starches, fats, sugars, or proteins, will end up as extra tissue in our body. And that you should be cautious or suspicious of any diet that focuses on just one thing. And I just thought that is so important, because you said no matter what, the extra calories will end up as fat, no matter what the source is. I feel like that's huge, because when you look at all these different diets, it is targeting certain things. And I think it just gets way too confusing. So could you just talk about that? Ultimately, it ends up the same as fat.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. It's you can take, fat and carbs are the easiest way to gain fat, but they can both turn into fat. Even proteins, I suppose, could do it. It'd be a little more complicated because your body has to chop them up and turn them into glucose or fatty acids and put it back into fat. But it can still happen, right? So if you eat too much, if you eat more than you burn, it will always add up eventually as fat. It doesn't matter how. And I think that's the problem with the kind of low carb. Low carb as a strategy can work really well. Low carb kind of tribalism right? It's all about carbs, and that's all that matters. And then the other side of that is if you reduce carbs, you can eat anything you want. You can eat a 5,000 calories a day as long as there's not carbs.
Yeah.
That's really not true. It really isn't. Now, it might feel like if you take carbs out of your diet that you can eat anything you want. And that gets down to your brain's regulation of how full you feel. If you have no carbs on your menu and it's all green vegetables and steak, your body will say, okay, I think I'm done. At a lower energy at a lower calories eaten than if you can have the steak and veggies and then ice cream, right?
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of magic there, although it can feel really easy to lose weight on a low carb diet. So my thing is, look, I'm not trying to tell people to switch diets at all. I didn't write a diet book. There's no recipe chapter in there.
Yeah.
I just want folks to understand how it works, because I think it kind of takes the stress out of it a little bit.
Yeah. I had your book out when I was, reading it. And I think, the people around me, it's funny because they want to know this, why is it so easy to put fat on, and why is it so hard to get off?
Yeah.
Like, you could just layer it on, right? And I think you even said in your book, you could just keep getting it and getting it and getting it. I mean, it could just, just piling it on.
Yeah. Your body has there's no real upper limit to how much fat your body is willing to put on, which is a shame, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. Your body stores energy two different ways. One is as fat, and one is as this stuff called glycogen. Glycogen is like a form of glucose, basically. And it's for fast energy use. You put glycogen in your liver and your muscles. But there's a hard cap on how much glycogen your body can hold. And when you're done, when you fill up your glycogen buckets, all the other extra energy has to go to fat. That's the way it works. And it's a shame there's no limit on the fat buckets. Apparently, over evolutionary time, that's never been an issue, right? There's never been that's never been a concern evolutionarily that natural selection has said, has sort of have weeded that out. To kind of anthropomorphize natural selection for a minute. But anyway, so we're stuck with this physiology.
What about, you hear about those rapid dieting and, high caloric restriction and that, but doesn't dieting actually decrease your metabolism? And is that why it works against you ultimately?
Certainly, like really severe crash dieting does. If you're trying to lose, 10 pounds for that wedding next weekend, that's really severe dieting, right? I mean, that's too fast, too soon. And your body will actually reduce how many calories you're burning, right? All those mechanisms will slow down, and it'll actually frustrate your weight loss. So I think the goal then is to find a way to, in the same way that you probably gained weight slowly, almost imperceptibly, you have to understand that that's probably going to be your best way to lose weight, is to sort of do it, in a moderate way.
What does it mean? Like I've heard our body has a set point, and I was wondering, you hear people that I've lost all this weight on keto, I've done all this, and I've had people do that just to gain it right back. And is that because our body has a set point where it just goes right back? I mean, what does that mean? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, your body has a couple of different set points, a bunch actually. That's why, that's homeostasis, how much sugar you're supposed to have in your blood. Your body temperature is a set point, right? And it turns out that your weight also seems to be a set point, and how much fat you carry. Now, so I mean, a couple of things. You can change weight durably and keep it off, but it's not easy. I mean, that's the truth. And if you kind of stop the behavior that got you there, then your body will rebound to wherever you were before. That's the set point. It wants to get back to that weight. You can ask yourself, isn't it interesting? If you can have sort of an academic thought about it, rather than just being frustrated, of course. But why is it I came back to my old weight and not to some new weight? Right. And the answer is because your body likes you at that weight, and that is your set point weight. Now you can lose weight and keep it off. People do. And it's hard, but you can do it. I think, though, that the fact that there is a set point, your body kind of likes to maintain whatever weight it's at, tells us, we need to worry about this in our own lives, but we also have to be really serious about this for our kids.
Yeah.
Right. Childhood obesity is not just like adult obesity where, look, now there's this extra number of people that have overweight issues. They're on a trajectory for life to potentially have these weight issues. Right.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if we can keep them at a healthy weight through childhood and into their 20s, maybe that gives them that's their set point now, and they have a healthy set point, and maybe that's a little easier for them.
Yeah.
So it really is critical, I think, that we focus on childhood issues with this, because the set point is a real thing.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. It's amazing. You would never have seen overweight kids, and now it's so common. Big problem.
Yeah.
Here, I thought it was good in your book. You talk about, the Hadzas, they're not intermittent fasting. They're not eating paleo. They're not ketogenic. They're not any of these.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good point. But how does fasting, we've heard a lot about fasting and as an important weight loss technique, but also for longevity standpoint. How does the fasting affect our metabolism? And is the intermittent fasting a beneficial option, do you think, for weight loss or just for health in general? How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it's another strategy to reduce how much you eat, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think it's anything more than that, as far as we can tell. Now, people will say, "Oh, but what about autophagy? And what about, the things that your body does?" And well, maybe, but we don't know that it's a whole lot different with that, rather, with intermittent fasting, where you don't eat for a block of the day, than it is if you restrict calories in other ways. And the kind of parallel random control trials that have been done on this, time restricted feeding versus regular feeding with just fewer calories, so the calories are matched, don't show a big difference in the two. Now, there might be other things that are going on. I think it's still kind of early days for fasting research.
Mm-hmm.
The longevity issues, right? When you calorie restrict mice or you calorie restrict monkeys in a lab, we don't have the lifetime study on the humans to know if this is true for humans too, but it seems promising. Calorie restriction does seem to extend life.
Okay.
The mechanisms there are still being worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it doesn't seem to matter if it's restricted because you fast for a part of the day, or if you just sort of make your meals smaller. So I'm agnostic. I'm not saying that there isn't anything there, but I haven't seen anything that makes me go, "Oh, wow, this is really fundamentally different than just restricting calories in another way."
Yeah, I wasn't sure, you hear about like letting your digestive system work, all of that. I didn't know if that was really the important part of it, or if it's just eating less.
Yeah, as far as I've seen, the data are still, and also I think, as a scientist, I'm skeptical inherently. I mean, I'm a professional skeptic. If somebody makes a claim, I want to see your data. And if the simple explanation is it's just fewer calories, and that seems to be the simple explanation here, then you need to have a lot of really amazing data for me to say, "Oh, it's not the simple explanation, it's the complicated explanation." Right. Yeah. So I guess you could take my take on this with a bit of a grain of salt, but I'm still in the skeptical mode on that one.
Mm-hmm. It's your book, you're kind of hitting against a lot of different things, as far as fads and diets. And have you gotten any pushback from people about your work being like, "Hey, wait a minute, you're saying that none of this stuff works." So has anybody given you any pushback on your work?
Yeah. I think it's a sign of success that I've managed to piss a lot of people off with the book.
Yes. Yeah. Because it's pretty much going against all of these things. And, not only that, just the money being spent on all of these different things. It's like, wow, you're pretty much saying, eat less.
Eat less, exercise more. I mean, it's why I wrote the book, honestly, right? I didn't write the book to sell anybody a diet or an exercise plan, because I'm not a big believer in those anyway.
Yeah.
I wrote the book because I do this work for a living.
Yeah.
I study energy expenditure professionally, have been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've had the chance to do it in some exciting, fun places, so that was extra fun to share.
Yeah.
But I was tired of looking at books on the bookshelf or on Amazon, and it's the metabolic this or the energy that. And you look at the book, you go, "What the heck is this stuff? This is not real science. This is not what we know in the world of metabolism research." And so I just wanted to share that and hopefully do it in a fun way, and just kind of say, look, the simple stuff really is what works. We're kind of understanding every year we understand a bit better why it works and how, but the fad stuff is really just that. And we need to maybe come back to basics a bit on this and understand the principles that we can use. When the fad stuff works, so keto diets work great for some people. Why do they work? Because keto is some kind of magic or new science that the scientists don't want you to hear about. It's all this conspiracy theory stuff. No, they work because you eat fewer calories. Right. I mean, it really is like, that's why they work. And so that's one great way to do it. If you want to try keto to lose weight, hey, a lot of people are going to have success with that. Good for you. I love it. Please do it. Give it a try. But to move from there to this is the only way to do it. Everybody who says anything else is lying to you. There's this global conspiracy. That's what makes me just crazy as a scientist, because I think, no, that's really not true.
I believe personally as well, there's no one diet fits all, one size fits all. But what are the common threads that you've found? I'm going to guess the Hadzas aren't eating a lot of processed foods. And, they're eating whole foods. What were the common threads that you found? And what do you follow? I mean, all the research. So what do you go by?
So I think, right, avoid processed foods. I think that's the number one weight gain food out there is all that processed stuff. Kevin Hall's done some really nice work on this, that you can match, the same diet that's got the same number of carbs, same protein, same fats. If this diet is full of highly processed foods, you overeat. And if this is full of whole foods, you don't. That's the big thing. Foods that make you feel full on less. And there's nice research going back decades on this now. Foods that are higher in protein make you feel full on fewer calories. Foods that are higher in fiber make you feel full on fewer calories. So looking at the protein and looking at the fiber in your food. And I basically follow that at home. I'm not a strict, dietary adherent to any one particular kind of diet. But I try to eat whole foods. I try to eat things I pick up out of the vegetable part of the store or the butchers or the whatever, foods that, what's the expression, foods that your grandparents would recognize. And it's just, I feel, I will say I've never had a big issue with weight. So it isn't so much about that. I just feel better. I feel less gross if I eat, real food. And so I'm not a particular tribal proponent for one thing or another. But I do kind of try to eat whole foods, limit processed foods.
So you feel like it's still okay to get your protein from meat? Yeah,
totally. Or for, and if you don't want to do that, beans and leafy vegetables are a great way to go, and nuts. You can do it different ways. But I have no trouble with people who want to get, I eat meat. I don't eat tons, but I eat meat. And absolutely.
I think you mentioned a foundational study in your book about foods that keep you full the longest. And that's what you've mentioned, like the protein. And I found it interesting that the carbs, the people that ate the carbs or the processed foods were hungriest again in 2 hours. I think.
That's right. The baked goods, like the croissants and donuts and muffins and they, for the same amount, first of all, a muffin like that you get at like the, whatever, like those big, huge prepackaged muffins you get, they're so full of oil and sugar. And that means that they're really calorie dense. So you've eaten 500 or 600 calories in a muffin. And because of the way that baked foods interact with your brain, you feel hungry again in an hour. Now you'd feel hungry again in an hour if you'd eaten, a little cup of oatmeal or whatever, maybe an egg, right? A couple of eggs or whatever. And you'd have much fewer calories and you'd be full for just as long. Right. Now, if you do that again and again, day after day, of course, on the muffin diet, you're going to gain a lot of weight. And on the other whole food diet, you're not. So I don't think it's magic. I think that's really it.
I think it's actually reassuring and like, it's simple. Like if you think about it, obviously It's just making those simple choices day after day. A cumulative effect keeps the weight off or gets it off.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, and the thing is, you can't change society, right? Not overnight.
Right.
So the supermarket's going to be the supermarket. It's going to be full of processed food.
Right.
The airport is going to be full of processed stuff to grab and go. And they know they've got you because you're stressed out and you're not thinking about your diet. You're just trying. Yeah. So like, there's always going to be food around you that's bad for you. And look, having the occasional donut, having the occasional beer. Look, I don't want to live in a world where I can't do that either. Right.
Right.
But you can decide what's in your house. Yeah. Right. I think that's kind of where it has to start. I think that's the best place to start. Right. If your house is not full of junk food, then you won't eat junk food all the time.
Right.
And I know it's not easy to do, but I think that's where you kind of just have to start. And again, it isn't that if you are overweight or obese that you somehow failed yourself. It's not a willpower thing. It's not a personal failing thing. On the other hand, you can take charge of some of this stuff, right? You can decide to try to shop healthier and try to start there. And maybe that helps.
How important, how accurate are these fitness trackers we're all wearing? And is it important for weight loss to keep a food diary and weigh ourselves frequently?
The fitness trackers tell you how much you move. That's good. You should move. So if that's like, you want to close your rings or you want to get so many steps, that's great. And if it helps you do that, fantastic. The number of calories it says you've burned at the end of the day, that's kind of a guess. And it's not a very good one. So I don't, that little nugget of data, I don't put much into. And that comes back to the Hadza work, right? That you can be more active. And if your body adjusts to that level of activity, then it'll seem like you're burning lots of calories on your activity tracker, but actually that's an overestimate. But again, if it helps people kind of keep track of activity, that's a good thing. Counting calories in and out, that can be a good way to be aware of the food you're eating. I think a lot of times people aren't sort of really aware of how much they eat and when. And so taking a food diary for a while, I think can be make you more kind of conscious of it and help. But at the end of the day, the best piece of technology you've got in your house to track energy in and energy out is your bathroom scale.
Okay.
That's really it. And if you have one that can measure body fat percentage, that's kind of cool too, because maybe if you're working out and you're adding muscle, right, and you're decreasing body fat percentage, you can feel good about that, even if the total number of pounds isn't changing much, right? So that's nice, but you don't need that. You kind of know how you feel. So if you're feeling good and your numbers are good, but that's really the ultimate decider of your calories in and calories out, is if the bathroom scale number is changing.
Yeah. So somebody that is obese, I see this all the time, they'll come in for a DOT physical or whatever, and, they're got a high BMI. I mean, how do you start? Like, what do you say?
Well, I mean, I'm not a clinician, right? I'm not an MD. I'm not a dietary, I'm not a dietitian. And so I will not stay in my lane a bit here. I'm a researcher. Yeah. But I've talked to people about this. I've talked to MDs and other obesity researchers about this. And what seems to, where our worlds kind of intersect, we seem to be on the same page, is that you need to think about the foods you're eating. Are you eating foods that make you feel full on fewer calories, right? Think about what you're actually consuming. And then the other thing, and this isn't in the book really, because this is more psychology. My book it's not a psychology book, but having talked to people who've had a lot of success treating, obese and overweight in their clinics, is to focus on the behaviors around eating. Are you actually eating because you're hungry, or are you eating because it's evening time and the TV is on and you are queued up, right, to know, oh, that's when I sit down and I have a bowl of chips and so whatever it is. And so that kind of sort of conditioned behavioral eating that isn't really driven by hunger, it's driven by our behavioral patterns, to try to get that out of your life. And so, and then if you do that and you focus on foods that make you feel full on fewer calories, that's a start. I don't know. That's what I could say as an entry into this.
I think also controlling stress and sleeping, that does play a role as far as our hormone regulation, and because cortisol can play a big role in weight gain. and that as well. So I think that's important. I want to talk a little bit about, you're not advocating for a sedentary lifestyle of, sitting around, not doing anything, because it's not going to make a difference. Definitely daily exercise is important. I wanted to just talk about just the long-term benefits actually of continuing to exercise, as it decreases inflammation and the effects on decreasing reproductive cancers and improving our stress response and our immune function, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so when you exercise more and your body adjusts to that lifestyle of more exercise, it seems that one of the ways it's doing that is by, your energy is going to your muscles for exercise rather than to your other body systems. And so you're basically spending less energy on things like, inflammation, stress reaction. So, the cortisol bump and the epinephrine bump that you get from stress seems to be lower and finish earlier if you're an exerciser. Reproductive hormones seem to be kind of in a more regulated place, still healthy, but a little bit not sky high like they can be in very sedentary groups. And all of that seems to really help be an important piece of why exercise is so good for you. So exercise, we know, lowers inflammation. We know lowers stress reactivity. We know exercise makes you less likely to develop reproductive cancers. We've known all that for a while. And I think this kind of energy perspective on exercise and what it really does helps tie all that together.
Yeah, it makes sense. I know you get this question probably a lot. How much exercise is needed? I know typically when I'm in the clinic or whatever, patients, it's basically, you've got the 150 minute a week, that's what you at least need. Do you go by that? I mean, what do you say?
More. Yeah. Unless you're an Olympic athlete and you have overtraining syndrome, or you're in danger of that, we could all probably get more exercise. So whatever you're doing, wonderful, but try to do more.
Yeah. You talk about the overtraining, how it's, a lot of people are doing that. I talk to more and more people that are training for these Ironmans and all of these things. And that can actually maybe not be as good for us as we think, right?
Well, that's the flip side, right? So if exercise takes energy away from things, right? For most of us, that's a really good thing, because it's taking energy away from inflammation and it's taking energy away from stress reactivity. But of course, if you push it really, really far, you run out of things to take away from that you can give up, that are sort of optional, and you start taking away from things that you need, like immune function, like necessary immune function. And so people with overtraining syndrome, they don't recover from a cold or from an injury very fast, because their immune system, their repair systems just don't have the energy. Women especially, but also men, have reproductive issues sometimes if they push exercise too far. And I just want to emphasize that this is probably not relevant to 99% of the people listening.
Right.
You really have to be out there pushing it really, really hard. A really serious marathoner, triathlete, not necessarily professional, but you have to be putting in a lot of mileage to be in danger of any of this. And you probably know who you are if you're there, but that can help explain why people can push that far and get into that space where exercise stops being really good for you and actually starts to become kind of a problem.
Well, I think it kind of explains why sometimes, people do die and things, and you're like, what? They were doing all of these things, maybe that explains that a little bit, that, maybe they were doing too much. I wanted to ask you real quick about vigorous exercise. In your book, you do a great job. You talk about, moderate and all that. And you talked about the beneficial effects of vigorous exercise. Is that the best exercise? Is that what we should be doing, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, it kind of gets back to what counts as exercise, right? And anything can be good for you. Any kind of exercise can work, but it has to be the kind of thing that gets your heart rate up a little bit. So, imagine not just kind of strolling around, slowly, but actually walking briskly, walking your dog if you got an energetic dog. My dog's 15, so I'm not sure that walking her counts anymore, but, walking your dog and kind of really getting out and moving, getting your heart rate up a bit. That's when all of that's getting engaged and you're really, your body's working. And that's the level of investment for exercise, and you can get that different ways.
If you're used to sitting around and you jump up and start doing stuff, that would seem to me to start burning more calories than just the baseline, I guess.
Yeah, it takes a while for your body to adjust. And even after you do adjust, you're going to have bigger days and smaller days, right? If you run a marathon tomorrow, you'll burn more calories than you did today, assuming you didn't also run a marathon today.
Right.
And that's even after you kind of your body's adjusted to whatever activity level you're at. So it's really about this kind of constraint on expenditure and keeping energy expenditure within a narrow range. It's really about kind of long-term, after a few months of an exercise program, your body will adjust to that, it seems. And I should say, we're still working out all the details about how that adjustment happens. I mean, this is kind of the new interesting area of science right now, is exactly how all the dials get turned and all the adjustments get made. But it doesn't happen overnight. That's right. It takes a while to adjust.
Yeah. I think you did a study on sitting, and I think we hear that sitting is the new smoking. What were your findings on sitting and changing that up, or what?
Yeah. So the Hadza, the Hadza sit. Of course they do. Everybody sits and rests. And actually the amount of hours they spend sitting isn't so different from us, even though they're really active. They're kind of either really active or they're resting, and there's not a lot of in between. So they get a lot of activity, but they also, they also sit around and have lunch or whatever, or sit around in the evenings and talk. And so if you add it all up, number of hours spent sitting isn't so different than us, but the way they sit's different. So they're squatting or anything. They don't have comfy furniture where they can just turn their muscles off. Right. Yeah. And so, that seems to be what's so bad about sitting for us in the West, is that we really our muscles just go limp. And they don't have the kind of tonic kind of core or a balance kind of stabilization, I should say, kind of a role. That's what gets you. So you want to, for us, getting up and walking around a little bit to break up our sitting can help get some of that back. You can try squatting too at work. That might not work real well for you, but or you could just break up your sitting by walking. That seems to be another way.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, how has working with the Hadzas impacted your own life?
Well, it's there's been professional parts of it and personal ones. I mean, professionally, it's been so amazing to do all this new fun science. I mean, who knew all this was out there to discover? Yeah. Personally, again, it's just such a different perspective on life, and they're just such wonderful people. And to see kind of just how similar humans are across the board, even in these very different cultures, people are still people. Yeah. And I think that's given me a perspective on just sort of seeing common humanity in a world that's very polarized, right? Everything in this country has become, we all hate each other and can't get along and can't agree. And we seem so different, but actually people are people, and there's a common humanity there across the board. And I think that's been helpful for me to sort of, especially in a very polarized country, to kind of remind myself, oh, wait a second, we're all people. We all kind of want the same basic stuff. Yeah.
But when you follow social media and that, you see all these quotes, everybody's loving, and there's all of these things, and you're like, what are you most proud of with your work?
With my work? I think that we've been able to find new space, new stuff to do. As you come up as a scientist and you're getting trained as a scientist, in graduate school and stuff, it can seem like everything's been done, and that there's only kind of little details to fill in, but kind of everything's been done. To go out and say, oh, actually, there's this whole area that hasn't really been looked at very much, or maybe at all, and we're going to go do it. And then to go and have some success doing it, and get those papers out and get the new information out there, new data. That's been really fun. And I think that's what I'm proudest of. And then, to be able to share it with you, and to share it, with the general public as well, and not just have it be, scientific articles that my scientific colleagues will read, but hopefully, a book and other kind of interactions that people can engage with. That's really gratifying too. So that's, I guess, those two things.
Yeah. So what's next?
Well, we got to figure out exactly how the body adjusts. I think that's going to be a big piece of the research going forward. What is it exactly that's changing under the surface as the body adjusts exercise and activity? And then we continue to branch out and find new communities to work with, because I swear every time we work with a different community, I mean, the Hadza we've talked about a lot, but we've worked with other communities around the globe now. And every time you work with a new group, you learn something new about, what it means to be human and how we're all different, but we're all the same. And it's just so fun. And I feel really lucky to have this job. So we'll continue to keep doing what we're doing because it's so much fun.
Yeah. I think that adds to your longevity, having a purpose. I mean, I feel like that's a big part of life, and, having a purpose. It sounds awesome. All right. Well, where can people follow you? I mean, do you have something, focused on your book in a group, or how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So you can find us online anytime. Herman Pontzer at Duke, you can find our website there and see what's going on in the lab. If you want to find out more about the Hadza, and especially if you want to kind of give them a hand, because they're like a lot of indigenous communities, they struggle with some issues of modernization and pushes to modernize. And so we've started a group, a 501c3 charity called the Hadza Fund. So, and you can find that online, HADZAFUND.org. And the Hadza Fund is our way of kind of giving back and partnering with them. It's led by them and working with them to try to help them get access to some medicine, mosquito nets, education, that kind of stuff. So please check it out there. Yeah. And then of course you should read the book, Burn. If you haven't read it.
Here it is. It's you go through a lot more detail in the book than what we covered, obviously, and it's really easy to understand. We kind of just touched the surface of it. So, but definitely it's a great and informative book. And just carrying it around as I was reading it, people were so interested, and I'm like, I'm going to be talking to him. So
cool.
Yeah. So good luck to you. Thank you so much for talking and taking the time to talk with me. And I wish you the best of luck with everything.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.